Okay, so these notes are over graphing log functions. It's the very first day, so we're going to start off pretty easy. So we are going to be graphing y equals log base 2 of x. So what's a little different here is we can't just plug this into a calculator and crank out an answer because our base is 2. So what we need to do here is we need to put it in exponential form. So our base is 2, we're raising it to the y power, and that equals x. Now, if I were to make a table here, if I plug in x values, how we typically do, I'm still going to be trying to solve for an exponent. And that's really, really difficult to do without a calculator. Now, what we can do though, and this is very, very backwards, but we can plug in y values to get our x values, and it works just the same. So, if I plug in, let's say 0 for y, I would be raising 2 to the 0 power, which anything raised to the 0 power is 1. So I technically have a point at 1, 0. So I'm plugging in y values to get my x values. So I'm going to plot my point at 1, 0. Okay, now I'm going to plug in another y value. So let's do 1. So if I plug in 1, 2 to the first power is 2. So I have the point 2, 1. So 2, 1. Let's plug in 2. So I'm doing 2 squared, which is 4. So I have a point 4, 2. Okay, let's plug in, let's say 3. So 2 to the third power is 8. So we have a point 8, 3. Okay, let's do some negatives. So let's plug in -1. So 2 to the negative first power is 1/2. So I have a point at 1/2, -1. I've got -2. So 2 to the negative second power is 1/4. So I have a point at 1/4, -2. And I'm going to be getting closer and closer and closer to 0 without touching it. So if I plug in -3, to the negative third power is 1/8. If I plug in -4, 2 to the negative fourth power is 1/16. So I'm getting closer and closer and closer. So about like this is what our graph looks like. Our domain is we're getting as close to 0 as possible without ever equaling it, because there's nothing we can plug in for y that when we raise 2 to that power we'll get 0. So our domain is we're going to do an open parenthesis 0, since we can't equal it but we're getting close to it, and we're going to go to positive infinity. And then our range, our lowest y value is -infinity to our highest y value is positive infinity, and all of these are with parentheses. So very backwards compared to how we normally graph. We're going to plug in y values to get our x values, and then we'll still look at our domain range the same. Oops, I just messed something up. Okay, where's my next page? Ah, there they are. Okay, sorry about that, technical difficulties. So next I'm going to graph y equals log base 1/2 of x. So I don't really have anything to do here other than put this in exponential form. So my base is 1/2. It's raised to the y power, and that equals x. So just like I got done doing, I'm going to plug in y values to crank out my x values. And it works best if, I know it seems kind of silly to have another column with the point, but it's really easy to get mixed up and write your point backwards. Since you're plugging in y to get x, it's really easy to write it like you typically would xy. So let's see here. Let's plug in 0, because anything to the 0 power is 1. So I have a point at 1, 0. Okay, let's plug in positive 1. So 1/2 to the positive first power is 1/2. So I have a point at 1/2, 1. Let's plug in 2. So 1/2 to the second power is 1/4. So I have a point at 1/4, 2. Okay, so it looks like the bigger y values we plug in, we're going to be getting closer to 0. So let's plug in a negative number now. So plugging in -1. 1/2 to the negative first power is 2. So I have a point at 2, -1. My pen is not wanting to write. So 2, -1 here. Let's plug in -2. So 1/2 to the negative second power is 4. So 4, -2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Plug in -3. So 1/2 to the negative third power is 8. So I've got 8, -3. And so this is about what our graph is going to look like. I'm going to get as close to 0 as possible without crossing it, because there is nothing that I can plug in for y that I'm going to end up getting 0 for x. There's no possible way. My domain, I'm getting as close to 0 as possible, so it's going to be a parentheses 0 to positive infinity, since it's going on and on forever to the right. And then my range, it's going on and on forever down, so it's -infinity to going up forever, positive infinity. And that is it for our short little introduction into graphing logarithms.